A Roman merchant in 64 AD wakes up to find his silver coins suddenly feel lighter. The emperor's face is still stamped on them, the size looks the same, but somehow his life savings just lost 10% of its value overnight. He doesn't know it yet, but his empire has just 400 years left. Fast forward to 1923 Berlin. A woman brings a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy bread. She leaves it outside the bakery for just a moment. When she returns, the wheelbarrow is stolen, but the mountains of cash dumped on the sidewalk like garbage. The thief wanted the wheelbarrow, not the billions of worthless marks inside. Now imagine it's 2024. You check your bank account. The number looks the same as last year, but your grocery bill has doubled. Your rent is up 30%. That stable savings account, it's bleeding purchasing power every single day. Welcome to Empire Ledger, where we decode the patterns that shape and destroy civilizations. These three people, separated by centuries and continents, share one thing in common. They're all watching the same movie. Different actors, different costumes. Same plot, same ending. The 2,000-year-old playbook of currency collapse has 7 stages. Rome completed all 7. Weimar Germany speedran them in 3 years. And right now, the US dollar just entered stage 5. The clock is ticking. Here's what they don't teach you in economics class. Every single reserve currency in recorded history has eventually failed. Not most, not some, every single one. The Portuguese real dominated global trade for 80 years before collapsing. The Spanish real held reserve status for 110 years, then vanished into history books. The Dutch guilder lasted 80 years as king of currencies. The British pound sterling ruled for 105 years before being dethroned. The average lifespan of a reserve currency? Roughly 94 years. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since 1944. That's 80 years. We're not at the beginning of this story, we're near the end. But here's the fascinating part. Currency death isn't random. It's not a mysterious economic accident that just happens, like a lightning strike. It's a predictable, systematic process that unfolds in 7 distinct stages, like a terminal illness with identifiable symptoms at each phase. The Roman denarius took 400 years to die. The German reichsmark collapsed in 3 years. The Zimbabwean dollar imploded in less than a decade. The speed changes, but the stages remain identical. And right now, if you know what to look for, you can see exactly where the dollar is on this timeline. The warning signs aren't subtle anymore. They're flashing like emergency lights. This isn't doomsaying. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is pattern recognition backed by 2,000 years of monetary history. The same warning signs that appeared before Rome's collapse are flashing today. The same emergency measures that destroyed the Reichsmark are being implemented right now. The same excuses every failing empire made are being repeated word for word on cable news. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn the 7 stages of currency death, see the undeniable historical proof behind each one, and discover exactly where the dollar sits on this timeline. More importantly, you'll understand what comes next, and why the window to prepare is closing faster than most people realize. Because here's the terrifying truth about stage 5. Stage 6 comes fast, really fast. Let's begin. Stage 1, sound money and imperial ascent. Every empire's rise begins with one critical ingredient: money people can trust. When Rome established the aureus in 27 BC, it contained 99% pure gold. Citizens knew exactly what they held. Real value you could bite, weigh, and trade anywhere in the known world. The currency wasn't a promise written on paper. It wasn't backed by trust in politicians. It was the asset itself. This wasn't just money, it was monetary honesty, and it fueled the greatest expansion in ancient history. Fast forward to 1821. Britain, fresh off defeating Napoleon, returned to the gold standard with religious fervor. 1 pound sterling equaled a specific, unchanging weight of gold. No exceptions, no printing press games, no political favors. This iron discipline transformed a rainy island nation into an empire where the sun never set. Sound money built the British century. Then came America's turn. From 1792 to 1913, that's 121 years, the US dollar was defined as exactly 1/20th of an ounce of gold. A double eagle gold coin worth $20 contained nearly 1 full ounce of actual gold. Banks couldn't print recklessly because every dollar was redeemable in metal. Try to print fake dollars, citizens would show up and demand your gold. You'd be exposed immediately. This 121-year period of monetary discipline coincided with America's transformation from a colonial backwater into an industrial superpower. Here's what all these empires understood. Sound money creates sound incentives. When you can't print your way out of problems, you actually have to solve real problems. Government stays limited because unlimited spending is literally impossible. Savers are rewarded because their money holds value across decades. Investment flows to productive ventures, not speculation, because the measuring stick, the currency itself, doesn't shrink. The empire ascends, not despite sound money, but because of it. This is the golden age, literally and figuratively. Prices remain stable for generations. A day's wage buys roughly the same amount year after year, decade after decade. Grandparents can actually advise grandchildren about prices because inflation is negligible or non-existent. But here's the tragic pattern that repeats throughout history. This discipline never lasts because success breeds ambition, ambition breeds expansion, and expansion breeds the fatal transition to stage 2. The empire rises on the foundation of sound money, then abandons the very principle of its success. Every single time. Stage 2. Imperial overreach and military overspending. Success becomes the empire's worst enemy. With sound money fueling unprecedented prosperity, the empire grows powerful. The military becomes dominant. Then comes the seductive whisper every empire hears. Why stop here? Why not expand further? Why not protect more? Why not dominate everything? Rome's fatal expansion began innocently enough. Defend the borders, secure the trade routes, protect Roman citizens abroad. But defending borders required legions, 30 of them eventually, each with over 5,000 professional soldiers. These weren't part-time weekend warriors. They were full-time professionals requiring year-round salaries, equipment, food, healthcare, and generous retirement benefits. The empire stretched from the frozen forests of Scotland to the deserts of Syria, from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the Black Sea. Every mile of border needed defending. Every province needed occupying. Every rebellion needed crushing. The costs became astronomical. At its peak, military spending consumed 75% of Rome's entire imperial budget. 3/4 of everything Rome collected went to the military. The math stopped working, but the wars didn't stop. Spain learned nothing from Rome's lesson. Despite literally importing mountains of gold and silver from the Americas, the greatest resource windfall in human history, they still went bankrupt. How is that even possible? The Spanish Armada cost a fortune. European wars were endless. Maintaining far-flung colonies bled resources constantly. By 1557, just decades into their golden age, Spain defaulted on its debts for the first time. They would default 13 more times over the next century. Even infinite gold couldn't fund infinite war. Britain's empire eventually spanned 25% of Earth's land and 25% of its population. Magnificent? Absolutely. Sustainable? Not even close. 2 world wars defending this massive empire completely bankrupted the treasury. By 1945, Britain owed money to everyone and couldn't afford to keep the lights on, let alone maintain an empire. Now observe America today. 750 plus military bases in over 80 countries. Military spending of $877 billion annually, more than the next 10 nations combined. And that's just the official number. The real number, with all the hidden costs and black budgets, likely exceeds $1 trillion. 20 years in Afghanistan, 20 years in Iraq. Ongoing commitments to defend South Korea, Japan, all of NATO, Israel, Taiwan, and dozens of other nations simultaneously. Here's the brutal mathematical truth. No economy, no matter how large, can indefinitely support military commitments that span the entire globe. The revenue can't keep pace with the costs. Taxes are already high and become politically impossible to raise, high enough to cover everything. The empire faces a choice: cut back on commitments or find another way to pay the bills. Guess which one they always choose. That's where stage 3 comes in. Stage 3, first debasement, diluting the currency. This is the moment of original sin, when empires abandon principle for convenience, integrity for expediency. The bills are piling up. Military costs are unsustainable. Taxes are already high and politically toxic to raise further. The empire desperately needs money, but can't raise it honestly without massive political consequences. Then someone whispers the devil's bargain. What if we just reduce the metal content slightly? Just a little bit. No one will really notice. Rome, 64. AD. Emperor Nero faced a serious problem. Rebuilding Rome after the Great Fire was incredibly expensive, and those 30 legions scattered across the empire weren't paying themselves. His solution? Reduce the silver content in the denarius from 100% of pure silver to 90%. It looked the same, weighed almost the same. Surely no one would notice a mere 10% reduction, right? They noticed. Merchants immediately started testing coins. Money changers began charging premiums for old coins versus new ones. But Nero got his money, and a catastrophically dangerous precedent was set. When in trouble, debase the currency. What was unthinkable yesterday became official policy today. Britain's turn came in 1914. The gold standard, the sacred, untouchable principle of British finance for over a century, was temporarily suspended to fund World War I. Just temporary, they promised. Just until the emergency passes. Just this once. That temporary suspension lasted until 1925, 11 years. They returned to gold briefly, then abandoned it permanently in 1931. A 17-year temporary emergency measure. Sound familiar? America's debasement came in stages. 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt made private gold ownership illegal. The government confiscated citizens' gold at $20.67 per ounce, then immediately revalued it to $35 per ounce, a 41% overnight devaluation. Let that sink in. The government literally stole 41% of every gold holder's wealth with a pen stroke. 1965. Silver was removed entirely from dimes and quarters. The coins looked similar to untrained eyes, but the intrinsic value completely vanished. Your grandparents' silver quarters are now worth $5 plus in melt value today. Modern quarters? Worth exactly 25 cents, because they're made of cheap copper and nickel. 1971. Richard Nixon temporarily closed the gold window. Dollars could no longer be redeemed for gold internationally. This was supposed to be a temporary emergency measure to handle a short-term crisis. That temporary measure? Still temporary 53 years later. Here's the psychological pattern you need to understand. The first debasement is always sold as emergency, temporary, and absolutely necessary. It's never actually an emergency. It's just the consequences of decades of overspending. It's never temporary. It's always permanent. And the necessity is just code for we refuse to make the hard choices. Once you debase the currency the first time, the second time becomes inevitable. The discipline is broken. The principle is abandoned. The Rubicon is crossed. Stage 4 is just stage 3 without the guilt. Stage 4, accelerated debasement and inflation. The first debasement was hesitant and guilty. The second becomes easier. By the 10th, it's just official policy with fancy academic names. Rome's acceleration tells the story perfectly. After Nero's initial 10% silver reduction in 64 AD, each emperor debased further. By 100 AD, the denarius was 85% silver. By 200 AD, it dropped to 50%. By 270 AD, just 5% silver remained, basically worthless bronze with silver plating. In 200 years, the currency lost 95% of its value. A measure of wheat that cost 1 denarius in 50 AD cost 200 denarii by 300 AD. Weimar Germany compressed Rome's 200-year collapse into 3 years. In 1918, 29 marks equaled $1. By November 1923, 4.2 trillion marks equaled $1. Workers needed wheelbarrows for their pay. The dollar's acceleration is undeniable now. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $900 billion in 2008 to $7.7 trillion today, an 855% increase in 16 years. The money supply jumped 40% from 2020 to 2024 alone. Groceries cost 25% more. Housing jumped 40%. Used cars up 35%. The government blames COVID, Putin, supply chains, corporate greed, anyone except the money printers. The pattern is identical. Printing accelerates until citizens stop accepting the currency. We're watching it happen right now. Stage 5. Loss of faith and alternative currencies. This is where belief breaks. The currency still technically functions, but people stop trusting it for storing value. In 3rd century Rome, citizens refused new coins and demanded old ones with actual silver. Merchants weighed coins instead of counting them. People hoarded grain, livestock, land, anything real. Barter systems returned after centuries of monetary economy. Emperor Diocletian made inflation illegal and punishable by death. It failed completely. You cannot legislate trust back into existence. In Weimar Germany, citizens preferred anything except marks. Foreign currency, cigarettes, and food became real money. People spent paychecks instantly because holding cash overnight destroyed wealth. The currency became a hot potato. Zimbabwe's dollar became worthless while still official. Citizens used US dollars for real transactions. The government eventually abandoned its own currency in 2009. Today's warning signs are everywhere. Bitcoin surged from curiosity to corporate treasury asset. Central banks bought 1,136 tons of gold in 2022, the highest since 1967. China, Russia, India stockpiling gold while dumping dollars. BRICS nations, representing 45% of global population, are building dollar alternatives. China and Saudi Arabia now trade oil in yuan, not dollars. When central banks that control money start fleeing a currency, that currency is deep in stage 5. Stage 6 comes next, and it comes fast. Stage 6, hyperinflation and monetary chaos. This is where slow bleeding becomes hemorrhage. Years of debasement compound into total collapse virtually overnight. By 400 AD, Rome collected taxes in goods because coins were worthless. A 1,000-year monetary civilization returned to primitive barter. Money stopped being money. Weimar Germany remains the textbook case. By November 1923, prices doubled every 3.7 days. Bread cost 200 billion marks. A woman left money on her doorstep. Thieves stole the basket but left the billions of marks. Restaurants stopped printing menus, just multiplied yesterday's prices by the daily inflation rate. People burned marks in stoves because paper money was cheaper than firewood. Zimbabwe's inflation hit 89.7 sextillion% in 2008. Venezuela exceeded 1 million% inflation by 2018. Citizens became paper billionaires while hunting pigeons for food. The average Venezuelan lost 24 pounds from starvation. The pattern never changes. Government prints to pay debts. Currency value drops. Imports become unaffordable. Shortages develop. Citizens panic and spend immediately. Prices spiral exponentially. Total collapse follows. Could this happen to the dollar? America has $34.5 trillion in debt, $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and zero political will to cut spending. The only solution being discussed is printing more money. Every hyperinflation began with leaders saying that could never happen here. Stage 7. Currency reset and imperial decline. The end game arrives. The old currency dies, and the empire must replace it or collapse entirely. When Rome fell in 476 AD, the denarius vanished from history. The Byzantine Empire introduced the solidus backed by gold, returning to stage 1. Notice the pattern. New powers return to sound money, while failed empires become footnotes. Roman citizens holding savings were wiped out overnight. Only those with land and precious metals survived. Weimar Germany introduced the Rentenmark in November 1923. The exchange rate, 1 Rentenmark equaled 1 trillion reichsmarks. Life savings became worthless instantly. Those holding foreign currency and hard assets survived. Those who saved in the national currency were destroyed. Zimbabwe abandoned its currency completely in 2009, adopting foreign currencies instead. Their government gave up on their own money. Britain lost reserve status in 1945, from ruling a quarter of Earth to rationing bread in 1 generation. A dollar reset could mean introducing a new dollar at 10 to 1 or 100 to 1, vaporizing savings overnight, or mandatory digital currency with total government control, or the yuan or IMF, special drawing rights. Replacing the dollar as global reserve, the pattern is always the same. The middle class who saved and trusted the system gets annihilated. We're not in stage 7 yet, but stage 5 leads to stage 6, and stage 6 leads inevitably here. Where the dollar is right now, we're in stage 5, loss of faith, and the evidence is undeniable. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded 855% in 16 years, from 900 billion to 7.7 trillion. The money supply increased 40% from 2020 to 2024 alone. This is a digital debasement on steroids. Foreign nations are fleeing. China reduced treasury holdings from 1.3 trillion to under 800 billion. Russia dumped 90% of dollar reserves. Saudi Arabia now accepts yuan for oil, killing the 50-year petrodollar system. Central banks bought 1,136 tons of gold in 2022, the highest level since 1967. In 2021, the Fed chairman promised inflation was transitory. He was catastrophically wrong. Official inflation hit 9.1%. Real inflation for food, energy, and housing exceeded 15 to 20%. Savings accounts offer 4%, while real inflation runs 6 to 8%, guaranteed wealth destruction. Bitcoin adoption exploded. BRICS nations are openly building dollar alternatives. This isn't conspiracy. They're announcing it publicly. U.S. national debt stands at $34.5 trillion. Interest payments now exceed defense spending at $870 billion annually. There's zero political will to cut spending and no way to tax enough to cover the gap. The 7-stage checklist shows stages 1 through 4 complete. Stage 5 in progress. Stage 6, warning signs appearing. What took 140 years to begin is now accelerating exponentially. The conclusion. The pattern has repeated for 2,000 years. 7 stages. 0 survivors. Rome didn't think it could happen to them. Spain had mountains of gold and still collapsed. Britain ruled half the planet and lost reserve status in 1 generation. Weimar Germany went from industrial powerhouse to worthless cash in 36 months. Every empire believed they were different. Every empire had experts explaining why the old rules didn't apply. Every empire printed their way into oblivion. The question isn't whether the dollar will complete all 7 stages. History already answered that. The pattern is clear. The math is inevitable. The real question is, what will you do with this knowledge? You can't stop an empire's decline, but you can recognize what stage we're in and prepare accordingly. Protect your family. Move assets into things that survive currency resets, land, productive assets, hard money, skills, and community networks. The Romans who saw it coming survived. The Germans who recognized the pattern early saved their families while millions lost everything. Will you recognize the pattern before stage 6 begins? Because once hyperinflation starts, it's already too late. The window is open now, but it's closing. This is Empire Ledger. Subscribe now. The patterns don't lie.